"Get your hands off that console, Brad," I said, my voice dangerously calm in the hum of the compressor room. Brad Thorne sneered, his hand hovering over the safety bypass switch. Behind him, his father, Roger Thorne, the CO, crossed his arms. "Sign the compliance waiver, Victor, or pack your trash. We have a $5 million holiday shipment to move, and your safety rules are costing us 50 grand an hour." I looked at them both, took a slow breath, and handed Roger my badge. "I won't sign it," I said, walking away. I knew exactly what would happen when that sensor went red 18 years. That is how long I had given to Northwest Cold Logistics. I started here back in 2008 as a junior safety coordinator, fresh out of my certification courses, making barely enough to pay rent on a drafty 2-bedroom apartment. Over nearly 2 decades, I had watched this facility grow from a modest 3-aisle cold storage warehouse into a massive 400,000 square foot automated distribution hub. We handled the bulk of the frozen and chilled logistics for the entire Pacific Northwest region, pulling in a cool $45 million in annual recurring revenue. The heart of our entire operation was our ammonia refrigeration plant, holding 15,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia to keep our freezer bays at a constant -10 degrees Fahrenheit. At 48 years old, I knew every pipe, sensor, and emergency valve in this building like the back of my hand. I had spent countless nights studying the federal codes, eventually earning my certification as the facility's sole registered Environmental Protection Agency Risk Management Plan signatory. It is a highly specialized license under the Clean Air Act, Section 112(r). The federal government does not let just anyone manage 15,000 pounds of a toxic gas that can blind or suffocate a human being in under 60 seconds. My signature on the annual RMP audit was the only thing keeping the doors open. If the EPA database lacked a registered certified operator of record, the facility was legally classified as an unmonitored chemical hazard, triggering an immediate shutdown and daily fines of $59,000. For years, the old guard respected my authority. The founder of the company, a veteran logistics man named Walter Vance, understood that safety and profitability were two sides of the same coin. If a stacker crane in our 70-foot-tall automated storage and retrieval system malfunctioned, or if an ammonia sensor flagged a leak, Walter never questioned my decision to pause operations. But Walter retired in 2024, stepping back to remain a silent majority board member and the landlord who owned the physical property under a personal real estate trust. He leased the warehouse back to the company under a long-term commercial contract. With Walter gone, the board hired Roger Thorne as the new chief operating officer. Roger was a suits and metrics guy, someone who had never worn steel-toed boots in his life. He saw the warehouse not as a complex web of high-pressure machinery and human labor, but as a spreadsheet that needed to be squeezed. 6 months after taking the job, Roger brought in his 27-year-old son, Brad Thorne, as the new operations manager. Brad had a fresh business degree from a mid-tier state college, a shiny hard hat that had never seen a speck of grease, and a massive chip on his shoulder. Brad's first order of business was to look at our cycle times. Our automated stacker cranes, massive steel structures that glided down the narrow aisles at 30 miles per hour to retrieve pallets of frozen fish, were governed by infrared light curtains and safety limit switches. If a worker opened an access gate, or if a sensor detected a misplaced pallet, the entire aisle would lock down instantly to prevent a catastrophic collision or a structural collapse of the racking. "We are losing 12% of our hourly throughput to these safety stops," Brad complained during our first weekly operations meeting, clicking through a PowerPoint slide. He sat at the head of the table, tapping an expensive fountain pen against his palm. "We need to hit 150 pallets per hour to satisfy our new holiday contract with Glacier Logistics. Right now, Victor's safety lockouts are keeping us at a crawl of 95. Those lockouts are there because the automated cranes operate under high pressure, Brad," I explained, leaning back in my chair. "If a crane hits a misaligned pallet at full speed, it can buckle the structural steel of the rack. That rack holds 90 tons of frozen inventory. If it collapses, anyone in that aisle is dead. It is a direct violation of OSHA Title 29 CFR Section 1910-179. Roger Thorne, sitting at the end of the table, let out a dry cough. OSHA guidelines are written for worst-case scenarios, Victor. We need to be agile. Brad has studied the logistics flow, and we believe we can safely bypass the safety limit switches on the non-peak shifts to increase speed. We just need you to sign off on a temporary operational waiver. I am not signing a waiver to bypass federally mandated safety curtains, I said flatly. If the sensors are bypassed, the cranes will not stop for a physical obstruction. I have been running this floor since Brad was in elementary school. I know what happens when these systems are pushed past their limits. Brad's face flushed red. He looked at his father, then glared at me. The industry has changed, Victor. We cannot let outdated safety paranoia hold back a $45 million operation. Either you adapt to our numbers, or we will find someone who can. I looked at the young manager, then at his father. Roger did not correct his son. In fact, he gave me a tight, cold smile. I realized then that my thumb neon and my 18 years of spotless safety records meant nothing to these men. They did not see a dedicated professional protecting their workers and their assets. They saw a roadblock. But they did not understand the leverage I held or the absolute legal authority tied to the very machinery they were planning to override. I kept my mouth shut, but as I walked back down to the freezing warehouse floor, I knew the battle lines had been drawn. I began keeping a detailed journal of every directive, every email, and every verbal exchange, saving copies of our maintenance logs to an external drive. If they wanted to play games with safety regulations, I would make sure they paid the ultimate price. By early November, the tension on the warehouse floor was thick enough to cut with a wire. The holiday rush was in full swing, and refrigerated trucks lined up at our loading docks from 5 in the morning until midnight. Under Brad Thorne's relentless pressure, the warehouse was pushing its operational limits. Every night, the automated stacker cranes screamed down the aisles, retrieving pallets at speeds they were never designed to maintain. On a cold Tuesday morning, during my routine safety walkthrough in ASL 7, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of our senior crane technicians, a guy named Marcus, who had been with the company for 8 years, was standing on a scissor lift near the overhead rail. He was wrapping heavy-duty black electrical tape over the receiver of the infrared light safety curtain. "Marcus, get down from there," I called up. He lowered the scissor lift, looking guilty. "Brad told me to blind the sensor in AL 7 because of a warped rail stopping the crane," Marcus mumbled. "He threatened my overtime if I refused. Blinding a safety curtain is a willful violation. Peel it off. I'll deal with Brad," I said. He complied. After verifying the sensor was clear, I marched straight to the operations office. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open to find Brad leaning back in his leather chair, laughing at something on his phone. "Brad, we need to talk," I said, slamming the safety logbook onto his desk. "Your technicians are blinding the infrared sensors in ASL 7 on your direct orders. That is a flagrant violation of OSHA 29, CFR Section 1910.179. It is a Class A safety hazard." Brad's smile vanished. He stood up, trying to look intimidating, though he was a good 3 inches shorter than me. "I run operations, Victor. If a sensor is throwing false positives and stopping our trucks, I fix it. A warped rail is a minor maintenance issue. We can't afford to shut down an entire aisle for 2 days to realign a rail when Glacier Logistics has 20 trucks waiting. It's not a minor issue when a 90-ton crane is flying blind," I snapped. "I sent you and Roger an email detailing this. I am CCing the board if this happens again." Brad laughed, a grating, arrogant sound. "Go ahead. Write your emails. Victor, my dad is the COO. Who do you think the board is going to listen to? A safety guy who does nothing but cost them money, or the operations team that is about to deliver a record-breaking quarter?" I didn't argue. I turned around and walked out, but I made sure my phone was recording when I went back to the floor. I documented the tape sensors, took high-resolution photos of the maintenance logs, and saved the video footage of the cranes running with bypassed limit switches. I knew they wouldn't stop here. 2 weeks later, the real danger arrived. On a Friday afternoon, the Honeywell gas detection system in compressor room B flagged an anhydrous ammonia concentration of 25 parts per million. While 25 ppm is the legal limit for an 8-hour exposure, it was a clear warning sign of a developing leak in the high-pressure receiver valve gasket. I immediately pulled the safety protocol lever, activating the flashing yellow warning lights outside the compressor room and initiating a partial lockdown of Section 4, the freezer bay closest to the compressor room. Within 5 minutes, Roger and Brad Thorne descended on the control room like a pair of angry hornets. Roger's face was dark with fury. "What is the meaning of this, Victor?" Roger demanded, pointing at the flashing yellow light. "Why did you halt the loading of the Glacier Logistics trucks? We have $5.2 million worth of frozen seafood that needs to be on the road by Monday morning. You've just stopped the entire line. We have a confirmed ammonia leak in compressor room B," I said calmly, pointing to the digital readout. "It is at 25 ppm and rising. I need to shut down the compressor, bleed the line, and have the maintenance crew replace the gasket. It will take about 4 hours. 4 hours, Brad shrieked. That will blow our entire shipping schedule. The trucks will miss their delivery windows at the port. Glacier will charge us $150,000 in late penalties. If that gasket blows completely, Roger, I said, ignoring the son and looking directly at the father, we will have 15,000 pounds of toxic gas leaking into the atmosphere. It will trigger a regional evacuation, and anyone inside this warehouse will suffer permanent lung damage or death. We shut it down now. That is the law. The sensor is probably just dirty, Brad argued, turning to his father. It's an old system. We can run the exhaust fans at maximum speed to clear the air and keep the loading crews working. Victor is just trying to sabotage our numbers. Roger looked at the digital display, then at me. Brad is right. Run the ventilation fans. Turn off the audible alarm so it doesn't cause a panic among the floor workers. We will fix the valve on Tuesday after the holiday shipment is gone. I will not turn off an active ammonia alarm, I said, stepping between Brad and the control console, and I will not allow workers to enter a contaminated zone. If you want to bypass this, you will have to sign a formal EPA RMP emergency waiver, taking full personal and financial liability for any injury or death. Roger sneered, his eyes narrowing. I don't need to sign anything, Victor. What I need is an employee who understands who is boss. He turned to his son. Brad, call a general meeting in the main boardroom in 10 minutes. Victor, you're with us. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the plush boardroom on the 3rd floor. Roger sat at the long mahogany table, with Brad standing triumphantly behind him. Roger pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a termination notice. You are being terminated immediately for insubordination and intentional disruption of business operations. Roger said, his voice cold and flat. We will have Brad assume the safety duties temporarily, hand over your keys and your badge, and leave the property. Security will escort you out. I looked at the paper. There was no severance package offered, just a cold dismissal. Under Clause 14D of my employment agreement, if I was terminated without cause, I was entitled to 12 months of my $115,000 salary. If I was fired for whistleblowing, that penalty doubled. They thought they could frame this as insubordination to avoid paying a dime. I looked up at Roger, then at Brad, who was grinning like a schoolboy. Understood, I said. I picked up my badge, laid it on the table, and walked out. I didn't yell, I didn't make a scene. I walked down to my office, packed my personal files and my external hard drive into my briefcase, and walked out of the building. They thought they had won. They thought they had cleared the path for their record-breaking shipping numbers. They had no idea they had just pulled the pin on a regulatory grenade. The drive home was quiet. I didn't feel angry. I felt the cold, calculating focus of a man who had spent decades managing high-stakes industrial hazards. Roger and Brad Thorne believed they had cut the brakes to make the train run faster. They didn't realize that I was the tracks. The moment I walked into my study, I opened my laptop and booted up the EPA's Central Data Exchange portal. As the sole certified risk management plan signatory for Northwest Cold Logistics, my profile was hard-coded into the Federal Regulatory Registry for the facility. Under the Clean Air Act Section 112R7, any industrial warehouse holding over 10,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia must maintain a certified RMP operator of record on site. This is not a mere bureaucratic formality. If a facility operates without an active, certified operator registered in the federal database, it is an immediate, material violation of environmental safety laws. I navigated to the facility registry, entered my federal credentials, and clicked the option to resign as the operator of record, effective immediately. The portal prompted me with a red warning box. Warn: removing the sole certified RMP signatory will place facility ID 100489291 in non-compliant status. Operational authorization may be suspended. I didn't hesitate. I clicked confirm. The system updated in real time, marking Northwest Cold Logistics Chemical Management status as inactive non-compliant. An automated, high-priority email alert was instantly generated and sent to the EPA Region 10 Enforcement Division in Seattle, flagging the warehouse as an unmonitored high-risk chemical hazard. Next, I opened the OSHA online complaint portal. Having worked with federal regulators for 18 years, I knew exactly how to format the report to trigger an immediate, unannounced inspection. I filed a formal whistleblower complaint under Section 11C of the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. I attached the high-resolution photos of the taped-over infrared light curtains in ASIL 7, the digital copies of the crane maintenance logs showing the bypassed safety circuits, and the audio recording of my conversation with Brad Thorne, where he ordered Marcus to blind the sensors. But my most damning piece of evidence was the Honeywell gas detection log. I uploaded the export showing the ammonia levels spiking to 25 ppm in compressor room B, followed by the audio file of Roger Thorne ordering me to turn off the audible alarm and run the ventilation fans rather than shutting down the line. I labeled the files clearly: evidence of willful safety violation and immediate danger to life and health. Under federal guidelines, an active, unaddressed ammonia leak in a confined workspace with bypassed safety alarms is classified as an imminent danger situation, which mandates an inspection within 24 hours. With the federal trap set, I made one final phone call. I dialed the private number of Walter Vance, the company's retired founder and my former boss. Walter was 71 now, living on a quiet ranch in eastern Washington. He was a tough, old-school operator who had built the company on sweat and integrity. "Victor," Walter's gravelly voice came through the line. "It's been a while. How are things at the plant?" "Not good, Walter," I said. "I was fired 3 hours ago." There was a long silence on the line. "Fired? You? For what?" "For refusing to bypass federal safety protocols," I said. I explained the entire situation, starting from Brad's orders to tape over the stacker crane-like curtains to Roger's directive to ignore the ammonia leak in compressor room B to protect the Glacier Logistics holiday contract. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him about the 25 ppm leak and how they had threatened the staff's overtime to force compliance. They bypassed the ammonia alarm. Walter's voice was suddenly very quiet, but it had the sharp edge of a razor. Compressor room B sits right under the main electrical vault. If that room fills with anhydrous ammonia and there's a spark from the switchgear, the entire east wing of my building will blow sky high. "I know," I said. "That's why I refused." Roger handed me my walking papers and put Brad in charge of safety. "I've already removed myself from the EPA registry and filed an imminent danger complaint with OSHA." "My God," Walter breathed. "If the EPA finds out we're operating a 15,000-pound ammonia plant without a registered RMP operator, they'll lock the gates." "But more than that, Roger is risking lives. He is risking my building." Walter owned the land in the physical warehouse building, under his family's private real estate trust. He leased the facility back to Northwest Cold Logistics. I knew the details of that lease because I had helped draft the environmental compliance sections. "Years ago, Walter," I said. "Do you remember Section 12.4 of the Commercial Lease Agreement?" "The Compliance Covenant," Walter said, his tone tightening. "The tenant must maintain all federal, state, and local safety and environmental permits. If a material safety breach results in a regulatory shutdown of the facility that exceeds 48 hours, it constitutes an automatic non-curable default of the lease." "Exactly," I said. "If the lease is defaulted, you have the right to evict them immediately, forfeit their security deposit, and take back the property." "A $1.2 million deposit," Walter muttered. "And they would have to move $40 million of automated equipment and inventory. It would bankrupt the company." "Roger and Brad think they can run hot and fast, Walter. They think they are above the regulations because they want to chase a $5 million contract. but they are about to lose the entire house. Victor, Walter said, his voice firm and steady, I want you to email me every piece of evidence you just sent to OSHA. I'm calling my corporate counsel right now. I've spent 40 years building my reputation, and I won't let Roger Thorne and his arrogant kid burn it down for a holiday bonus. You stay by your phone. This is going to get ugly fast. I'll send the files right now, Walter, I said. As I hung up the phone and began uploading the folders to Walter's secure email, I felt a deep sense of calm. The wheels of federal regulation and contract law were turning. Roger and Brad Thorne thought they had cleared their roadblock. They had no idea they had just stepped into the path of an avalanche. Monday morning, 8 a.m. It was the peak of the holiday shipping rush. Outside the warehouse, a line of 25 refrigerated semi-trucks stretched all the way down the Industrial Park Road, their diesel engines idling in the cold air. Inside, the warehouse floor was a chaotic mess. Brad Thorne was standing on a forklift platform, screaming at the workers to speed up the loading process. AL7's stacker crane was screaming down the rail, its safety sensors bypassed in the software system to prevent any automatic decelerations. Suddenly, 2 white Ford Explorer SUVs with federal government plates pulled up to the security gate. Sarah Jenkins, a senior OSHA compliance officer, stepped out of the first vehicle. Behind her was a team of 3 inspectors and an EPA Region 10 enforcement officer. Our security guard, a young kid hired by Brad to cut costs, tried to stop them. You can't enter without a visitor badge, ma'am. The operations manager said no visitors during the holiday rush. Sarah Jenkins didn't even blink. She pulled a federal administrative warrant from her briefcase and held it to the glass window. This is an imminent danger inspection warrant issued under Section 8 of the OSHA Act. Open the gate immediately, or federal marshals will be here in 15 minutes to assist you. The gate swung open. Within minutes, the federal team marched onto the warehouse floor. Brad, seeing the inspectors, jumped down from the forklift platform and ran toward them, his face twisted in a mixture of panic and anger. What is the meaning of this? Brad demanded, trying to block Sarah's path. This is a private facility. You can't just march in here and disrupt our operations. We have a shipment for Glacier Logistics that needs to go out in 2 hours. Mr. Brad Thorne? Sarah asked, checking her clipboard. I am Lead Inspector Jenkins. We received a credible report of an active ammonia leak in Compressor Room B, combined with the intentional bypass of crane safety light curtains. We also have a notification from the EPA that you are operating a high-risk chemical facility without a registered risk management plan signatory. That's a lie, Brad yelled, his voice cracking. Our safety systems are fully operational. The ammonia sensors are just throwing minor faults. We have everything under control. We will see about that, Sarah said, pushing past him. Inspectors, check the software logs on ASL7 and ASL8. I am heading to the compressor room. The EPA officer, a stern-faced man named Davis, walked straight to the main control terminal. As they approached Compressor Room B, the sharp, pungent smell of ammonia was unmistakable. Even with the exhaust fans running at full speed, the concentration of the gas in the hallway had reached 42 parts per million. Sarah Jenkins pulled out a portable ambient air monitor. The digital screen flashed red, beeping rapidly. 42 ppm, Sarah noted grimly. This is a severe health hazard, and your alarms have been manually silenced. She turned to Brad, her eyes blazing. You silenced an active chemical leak alarm while employees are working in the adjacent freezer bay? Are you insane? It's just a small leak, Brad stammered, his face turning paper white. We were going to fix it on Tuesday. At that moment, the OSHA inspector checking the cranes walked up. Ma'am, we checked the ASRS control panels. The light curtains are physically clear, but the software logs show a manual safety override code was entered on Friday night. The cranes are running without automatic emergency deceleration protocols. Sarah Jenkins took a deep breath, pulled a bright yellow pad from her clipboard, and began writing. Under the authority of Section 13A of the OSHA Act, I am issuing an immediate verbal and written imminent danger citation. You are ordered to cease all operations in AL7, AL8, and the entire Section 4 freezer bay immediately. The EPA officer Davis stepped forward, And since Northwest Cold Logistics lacks a certified RMP operator of record as required by Clean Air Act Section 112, the EPA is issuing a temporary administrative cease and desist order. You must power down the ammonia refrigeration compressors immediately. You cannot operate this refrigeration system until a certified signatory is registered and the leak is repaired. No, Brad screamed. You can't do this. If you turn off the compressors, the temperature will rise. We have $5 million of frozen seafood in those bays. It will spoil. Roger Thorne came running down from the executive offices, his tie askew, sweat dripping from his chin. Inspectors, please. I am Roger Thorne, the COO. Let's discuss this in my office. We can resolve this. We are a $45 million company. We can pay a fine, but we cannot shut down, Mr. Sarah Jenkins said, her voice like ice. This is not a negotiation. You have a leaking ammonia system, silenced alarms, and bypass safety sensors. If we don't shut you down, this facility could leak enough toxic gas to kill your entire shift or trigger a local disaster. Turn off the compressors now, or we will have federal marshals lock the building. 10 minutes later, the main breakers were thrown. The constant deep hum of the massive ammonia compressors, a sound that had filled the warehouse for 18 years, died. The conveyor belts ground to a halt. The lights in the automated aisles went dark. The silence in the warehouse was deafening. Within 3 hours, the temperature in the freezer bays began to creep up from -10 degrees. The 25 refrigerated trucks outside were told they could not be loaded. By 2 p.m., Glacier Logistics was notified of the delay. The reaction was immediate. Glacier's logistics director sent a formal notice invoking their contract's delay penalty, $150,000 per day. Furthermore, they warned NCL that if the product temperature rose above 15 degrees Fahrenheit, the entire $52 million cargo would be rejected and they would sue for full damages. Roger Thorne was trapped in his office, his hands shaking as he dialed my phone number. I was sitting on my back deck, drinking a hot cup of coffee, enjoying the crisp autumn air. My phone rang. The caller ID read Roger Thorne. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again and then again. On the fourth call, I finally picked it up. Victor, Roger's voice was frantic, almost screaming. Victor, you need to get down here right now. The EPA and OSHA have locked down the facility. They shut off the compressors. We have $5 million of inventory thawing out. Hello, Roger, I said calmly. I thought Brad was handling the safety duties now. Brad doesn't have the EPA license, Roger begged, his voice cracking. The EPA won't let us turn the system back on unless a certified RMP signatory registers the facility. The database won't let Brad sign up because he doesn't have the training credentials. Victor, please. You have to log into the portal and sign the reinstatement form. We'll pay you a consultant fee, $20,000 for 10 minutes of work. I'm sorry, Roger, I replied. But since I was terminated for insubordination and disrupting operations, I no longer have any association with Northwest Cold Logistics. I wouldn't want to disrupt your operations any further. Victor, I'll double your salary. I'll give you your job back. Just sign the database and get these inspectors off my back. Speak to my attorney, Roger, I said. And by the way, you might want to check your email. Walter Vance sent you a little notice. What? Roger gasped. Have a nice day, Roger, I said, and hung up. I took another sip of my coffee. The trap had sprung, and the walls were closing in on the Thorne family. By Tuesday morning, the situation at Northwest Cold Logistics was a full-blown emergency. The facility had been dark for 24 hours. The internal temperature of the freezer bays had risen to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. If it hit 15, the $5.2 million worth of frozen seafood for Glacier Logistics would be deemed unsaleable. Roger Thorne's email inbox was flooded with legal notices, and the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. I was invited to the meeting by Walter Vance himself. When I walked into the third-floor boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. Roger Thorne sat at the table, his face pale and sunken. Brad stood next to him, his hands pocketed, looking like a teenager who had just been caught stealing. The rest of the board members, representing the major investors, looked grim. Walter Vance stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed over his chest. Roger, the board chairman began, give us an update. Why is the facility shut down, and how do we get the EPA to lift the cease and desist? Roger stood up, clearing his throat. It's a minor administrative misunderstanding. Our safety director, Viktor Kowalski, resigned abruptly and removed himself from the EPA registry to sabotage us. We are currently trying to register Brad as the new safety manager, but the EPA database is experiencing technical delays. Once that is cleared, we will repair the small valve leak and restart operations. We should be running by Thursday. Thursday? The chairman gasped. Glacier Logistics will have rejected the shipment by then. We will lose the $5.2 million, plus the late penalties, and they will sue us for breach of contract. That is a $10 million hit. The company cannot survive that. Walter Vance's voice cut through the room like a hammer. He reached into his briefcase and threw a heavy stack of documents onto the mahogany table. These are the OSHA citations, the EPA field reports, and the maintenance logs that Victor kept. Roger, you didn't experience a safety director sabotage. You and your son willfully bypassed crane safety sensors, taped over light curtains, and silenced an active ammonia leak alarm in compressor room B. Roger opened his mouth to speak, but Walter held up a hand, silencing him instantly. I built this company, Roger, Walter said, his voice low and vibrating with anger. I built it on the principle that the men and women on the floor go home to their families at the end of the shift. You risked an ammonia explosion that would have leveled this building and killed dozens of people. You did it to chase a holiday bonus. Walter pulled a final document from his folder and slid it across the table. As the owner of the land in this building, Walter announced, I am serving Northwest Cold Logistics with a formal 30-day eviction notice for material breach of Section 12.4 of the Commercial Lease Agreement. You have failed to maintain federal safety compliance, resulting in a regulatory shutdown exceeding 48 hours. Under the terms of the lease, the agreement is defaulted, and your $1.2 million security deposit is forfeited to my real estate trust. The boardroom erupted into chaos. The board members looked at each other in panic. Without the warehouse building, the company was dead. They could not move the automated cranes and $40 million of refrigeration equipment in 30 days. It was bankruptcy. Walter, please, the chairman pleaded, leaning forward. Is there any way to cure this default? We cannot lose the lease. The company will go under. Walter looked at Roger, then at Brad. There is only one way I will withdraw the eviction notice. First, Roger and Brad Thorne are terminated for cause, effective immediately. Roger's shares will be bought out by the board at a 20% discount, as allowed under our operating agreement for gross negligence. He gets no severance, and the company will sue him to recover the Glacier Logistics penalties. Roger slumped into his chair, his face completely devoid of color. Brad looked at his father, terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Second, Walter continued, pointing at me, you bring Viktor Kowalski back, but not as a safety director. You appoint him as the new vice president of global safety and operations. He will have a seat on the board, a starting salary of $175,000, a $50,000 signing bonus, an absolute unilateral veto power over any operational decision that affects safety. His department will be allocated a $1.5 million budget to overhaul the facility's safety systems. The chairman looked around the room. The other board members were nodding their heads in rapid, desperate agreement. Is there a motion to approve? The chairman asked. Motion approved, a board member said. All in favor. Every hand in the room went up, except for Roger Thorne's. It's decided, the chairman said, turning to me. Victor, do you accept? I accept, I said, on the condition that my contract contains a double multiplier severance clause. If the company ever terminates me without cause, or if I am forced to resign due to a safety dispute, I am paid 2 years of my salary immediately. Agreed, the chairman said. Roger, Brad, pack your offices. Security is waiting outside to escort you off the property. Victor, the warehouse is yours. Within 2 hours, Roger and Brad Thorne were walking out of the building, carrying cardboard boxes of their personal items under the watchful eye of 2 security guards. The floor workers stood and watched in silence as the men who had bullied and endangered them were led away in disgrace. On Wednesday morning, I was back on the floor. My first act was to bring in a certified industrial refrigeration crew. We shut down the main valve, bled the line, and replaced the degraded gasket in compressor room B. We calibrated the Honeywell ammonia sensors and ran a full system diagnostic. Next, we cleared the software overrides on the automated stacker cranes in AL7 and AA8, restoring the infrared light curtains to full operational status. Once the repairs were complete and verified, I logged into the EPA Central Data Exchange portal. As the new Vice President of Safety and Operations, I signed the RMP registry, bringing Northwest Cold Logistics back into full compliance. Sarah Jenkins and the EPA team returned to the site, inspected the repairs, checked the database, and officially lifted the shutdown order. At 1 p.m., I walked into the compressor room control deck and flipped the main power switches. The massive ammonia compressors roared back to life, a steady, powerful hum that vibrated through the concrete floor. The temperature in the freezer bays immediately began to drop, reaching -10 degrees before any of the Glacier Logistics inventory could spoil. Glacier Logistics, seeing the swift resolution, agreed to waive the contract penalties, satisfied that their product was safe. Now, I sit in my new executive office on the 3rd floor, looking out the large glass window at the bustling warehouse floor below. The forklift drivers are moving at a safe, controlled pace. The stacker cranes are gliding smoothly down the aisles, their safety sensors active and clear. Roger and Brad Thorne are blacklisted from the logistics industry, and they are currently facing a federal investigation by the EPA for willful safety violations. I take a sip of my coffee, feeling the deep satisfaction of a job well done. The warehouse is running, the cargo is cold, and the workers are safe. I saved the company, and I did it by refusing to compromise on the one thing that matters most.